Welcome everybody to today's Plants, Pests, and Pathogen. Our August Plants, Pests, and Pathogen is always a very special episode. Easy for me to say, right? Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, where we invite you to submit questions. So we're really excited to take a look at all of the interesting pictures that you have submitted. Today, we're going to look at the issues, try to diagnose them. Of course, Matt and Mike will. So always an exciting episode here in August. So we're going to switch up a little bit today. I'm going to start out with our program announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Mike, and they're going to take it for the rest of our session to look at your images that you submitted, and also if we have time, throw in a couple of bolos. Be on the lookout. So we'll go ahead and do those announcements before we turn it over. So first, we want everybody to know that registration is now open for Extension Master Gardener College, and we hope to see many of you there this fall. It will be held late October, 27th through 29th. It will be at NC State campus, but it'll be on our Centennial campus. And everything will be held within the Hunt Library, which is a really nice facility over on Centennial campus, which is close to the North Carolina Farmers Market, if you're not familiar with it, just kind of across from main campus. So we have a theme of gardening in a changing climate, learn, grow, share. So we'll focus on learning about how our climate affects plants, how we can help plants deal with the stress of more rain, less rain, more heat, just variable climate conditions and our changing climate. And we also want to share some tools and resources that you can use for educational programming in your community. So if you go to the link, I've dropped it in the chat, and or you can type in, this is a Go link. If you type it in your browser, it will take you to the EMG intranet, and there you can find more information and the registration link for Extension Master Gardener College. Also, especially if you're in the western part of the state, but this is certainly something all Master Gardener volunteers are invited to attend, is the Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium. This is hosted by Master Gardener volunteers in Buncombe, Henderson, Jackson, Madison, and Polk counties. And they invite you to join them for a fun-filled and educational day. They have a variety of speakers set up. It's a one-day event, October 12th. It'll be held at Blue Ridge Community College in Flat Rock, North Carolina, which is also, I've attended it before, a beautiful facility. They do have registration open, and if you register by August 31st, you get the early bird rate, which is $60, but it just goes up to $65 after that time. So we will include the link to this registration and to learn more about this event in the follow-up email. There are online classes coming up that you can join and learn more about a whole variety of plants. These are part of the Extension Gardener online classes. So they will start October 10th. There will be instructor-led sessions in each one of the courses listed here. So you have all kinds of opportunities to learn about a wide range of plants this fall. And for the also, in addition to the instructor-led courses, there are self-study versions of these classes that you can sign up and take at any time. So you just go in and explore the materials on your own, and you have several months access to the materials. So you've got two options now with the Extension Gardener online classes. The instructor-led courses for Master Gardener volunteers are $98. You get a special discount, and there's a code that you'll enter to get that. And the self-study versions are $89. So you can learn about that more online at the link listed below, which I'll add to the chat in just a little bit. And of course, will be included in the follow-up email as well. If you're interested in learning about therapeutic horticulture, we've got some great opportunities coming up this fall. This is also part of the Extension Gardener class offerings. These are both online. And they're set up so that you could take both of them this fall. There's Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture, which starts next week, August 29th. So if that one is something you want to get in on, you need to go ahead and get registered soon. And the follow-up class to that is Therapeutic Horticulture Program Development. So you have to have taken the intro course. It is a prerequisite for the next course. So they are scheduled so you could get them both in this fall. They are offered in partnership with the North Carolina Botanical Gardens. And there are discounts for volunteers and extension employees, but these courses are a little more expensive at $329 for the intro course and $379 for the second course. These are courses that George Place will be helping to facilitate. So if you remember our announcements from last week, we welcomed him on board. He was joining, he's always been with Extension for many years, but now he is joining the Extension Gardener team and working with the online classes. And if you're looking to go further afield, not work online, but go out and see things in the wild, there is an international travel study adventure to Costa Rica planned for February. This is also, again, part of the Extension Gardener offerings, the consumer horticulture offerings from NC State Extension. So this will be a wonderful opportunity to learn about tropical horticulture and crops, to explore rainforests, and just see a lot of fascinating plants, meet interesting people, and experience nature and wildlife in Costa Rica. So if you're interested in learning more about that, again, we'll be posting some information along with the recording link on the EMG intranet and sending that out in our follow-up email. As always, J.C. Ralston Arboretum has a wonderful schedule of things coming up for the month, many of them online, so you don't need to visit the site here in Raleigh. You can join them online for their Plant Lovers Tour, which are the first Tuesdays of the month, their Midweek with Mark, and their Gardening 101 webinars. You can explore a lot more and learn about their upcoming events at jcra.ncsu.edu. And then looking ahead to our Plants, Pests, and Pathogen schedule, we are rapidly moving through the 2022 season. We have 2 webinars left for this season. Our next one will be September 27th, and we're excited to welcome Rebecca Ward, who's going to talk to us about climate change mitigation for gardeners and homeowners. Rebecca Ward is the Assistant State Climatologist, and she has developed some great resources that she'll tell you about as well during that webinar. Then our final webinar for the season, we've moved it up a little bit from our normal date, which would have been the 4th Tuesday. So please make note that the final one this month will be October 18th. So that'll be the 3rd Tuesday of the month. And we'll be rounding out the season with just a look at the pest and plant disease issues. All of our recordings from this season are available on the Extension Master Gardener intranet. You go to the North Carolina site and you will find them under continuing education. And you can sign up for the upcoming Plants, Pests, and Pathogens on the EMG intranet calendar. And when you sign up on the calendar, it'll create an education hour report for you that you can then submit for participating in this continuing education. All right, those are our announcements. And with that, so glad to have everybody here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Mike to talk about the images that you shared and diagnose your issues, plant issues, that is.
Yes, so we're not professionals on diagnosing other issues. So we'll keep these to the plant and arthropod critter issues in your yard or in your home, but we've got mostly yard things. Okay, I'm going to share. Okay, please let me know if you are not seeing this. And hopefully you're all seeing this. Okay, so I'm going to drive the bus today, and Mike is going to tell me when I need to move on. And we are going to try and go this fairly quickly because we got a lot of submissions, luckily. So thank you first, thank you for submitting your images. We really love to see these. We try to include all images, but to save space, we sometimes do not include images that do not provide additional info. We will be discussing what's in the images, but also keep in mind that we may comment on the image quality and type, because this is also
well, you may be interested in this.
This is also helpful to for people to learn how to take better photos. So we hope this is a very informative session. And again, this is to help you all take better photos for diagnosis and make the process faster and more accurate. So without further ado, we're going to get to our first one. And this was submitted by Wanda Crutchfield from Durham County. It's a lilac, which I'm not super familiar with. It's not a very common plant down here. But the comments were about a month or so ago, spots, brown leaves, lack of flowering this year. I'm not sure how to comment on the lack of flowering because the plant looks overall fairly healthy. But we do notice these red patches, a little bit of a kind of dead leaf here, and some little kind of oval kind of marks on it. And if we look a little closer up, it looks like there's a little bit of fecal matter, some little black specks here, and these look like window feeding from some kind of insect. It's a very interesting and fairly, fairly distinct pattern we see here. There are these oval kind of windows, but unfortunately, we don't see any pests in these images. So I will say that chewing damage is often very difficult to identify without a pest in question because many insects have chewing mandibles. This window feeding is a little bit of an exception because there aren't a ton of species that will do this kind of very discrete oval window feeding. I suspect, and I'm not sure this is correct, but I suspect this may be tulip poplar weevils feeding in the late summer. And the only reason I suspect that is because they typically make these types of windows feeding in leaves. Now they are fairly specific to typically a tulip poplar and some magnolias, but I even heard of recently a sample up in Maryland of somebody them feeding on hemp. And it may be opportunistic feeding. Again, I don't know lilac that well as far as down here and what pests might get on it, but my feeling is that these are yellow poplar weevils, and I didn't put a picture in, but I'll put a link in. But I would say for this type of damage, if you see some chewing damage, especially if there might be some fecal matter, but you don't find the culprits, one of the best things to do is to actually go out and scout at night or scout at different times of day. Look under the leaves, look around the base of the plant, basically looking for any associated possible pests that may be causing these chew holes. Now, luckily, it looks like they're just chew holes from some kind of insect. That damage typically does not harm the plants, so I'm not sure why it's not flowering, but I suspect it's probably not due to this chewing because we could see when we go back, back here, that many of the leaves look fairly good. They have some holes in them or some windows chewed in them, but that shouldn't affect really the overall health of the plant. So I will drop a link actually after when I switch to the next slide and Mike talks. I'll drop a link in for that weevil just in case the person, Wanda, you want to check for this, but it shouldn't cause such serious damage. Okay.
And if I could chime in there, there are lilacs that are supposed to be adapted to the warmer climates of the South. I don't know if this is one of those. If not, then I would wonder about just having the lack of the cool, cold weather in the winter that lilacs, of course, do so enjoy back up in zone 4B where I grew up.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Okay. And actually, I'm going to drop the name in here. I can't get. I'm right now sharing the web browser. So if Charlotte or anyone else wants to, I'll drop the name in there if somebody wants to find a link for that weevil. But Mike, go ahead.
So we have Sandy Harwood, Chatham County, gave us these photos of her Autolucan cherry laurel, which first of all, congratulations, because I believe it is the only Autolucan cherry laurel in the state of North Carolina that doesn't have shot hole. It's pretty ubiquitous. Looks like insect feeding, but it's not. It's a disease process usually that causes spots that then drop out as the host reacts. The case here, though, is that say that let's see, it's been happening a couple of times in the last 5 years. Might simply be an aging issue. We just prune away the branches that die. The plant seems to recover and looks and still blooms. Every couple of years, a branch or branches turn brown and die in summertime. Perhaps I don't notice, but it seems to happen fairly quickly. Located in front beds of home facing west. So a lot of good ancillary information there about where the plants are located, the aspect, and so forth. I have seen something like this on some plants here on campus and not been able to figure out what it was. I think I recall having tried, but it's likely some kind of a canker fungus that's gotten in there, possibly at a wound, possibly from some stress. And you've done the right thing. You prune them out, go several inches into clean wood so that you're sure that you're ahead of any possible infection, and then the plant should do fine there, unless of course it gets down to the very base of the main stem. So it looks like what you've been doing is working for you. So I would just encourage you to continue to do that. We suspect it's not a root problem, because you'll notice that you've got other branches that look perfectly fine. There's no wilting or other symptoms on those. It does look like there's a little bit of genetic sport, a little bit of chimera going on there, but that of course is not going to be an infectious disease or a problem. Unless that maybe is even the variety. No, autoleucin's not supposed to have that.
It looks
right.
like that when I was looking at this before, Mike, it looks like this might be a different plant, not a Solomon seal or something like that, maybe.
I
Or
suspect it's a Leucothoe.
oh, okay, okay. I don't know those plants that well.
Yeah,
So I think that's the variegated one interspersed with the cherry laurel.
yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, but so okay. Hi, you good with that? You want me to move on?
Yes, next
Okay,
please.
great.
All right, here, Charlotte, I will ask you what you think of the plant ID. Certainly it's not a Chindoviburnum, as the landscaper had told, but would you say that this looks like the Viburnum odoratissimum?
The odoratissimum I've seen seems to have kind of dull leaves, which it's hard to tell from this picture. I actually did, like, my first glance, I thought it was Chindo. But usually, I mean, but it's not nearly as large as Chindo usually is. So, some of the big differences between those two to me are that Chindo is much, much larger, has a glossier leaf and a little bit more serrated edge.
A little bit
Where
longer leaf too, kind of more elongate,
yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, with a more of a point at the end. So, there's also the Sandwanka viburnum. I'm not sure if that's what it is. Definitely looks like a viburnum.
Well, the reason, the reason I was curious about the species too. Well, first let's read the comments here. The row of viburnum looked super when first planted, grew fast and had large shiny leaves. But then its first winter, giant colorful spots would come on the leaves and they would drop off. In the summer, the plant seemed to recover with lots of new growth. Then with cool weather, the fungus would start up again. This year I do have the spots even in the summer. I do routinely clear out all the dead leaves to throw away. I also switched from pine straw to hardwood mulch, so it would be easier to keep clean. That's probably a good idea in general. I brought propiconazole and sprayed leaves, hoping to help control the problem, but I think this just makes my leaves turn maroon and fall off just the same. So we'll assume for the moment that it is that species, which was, when I looked it up, hardy 7A to 9B, I think. And in Brunswick County, you are in what, 8B? Is that right? 8A somewhere? No, I think 8A. And I'm wondering if this may not just be natural leaf shed. So it should be evergreen in your area. But remember, just because a tree or a shrub is evergreen doesn't mean that individual leaves and needles are immortal, and they're going to shed at some point. So if you start seeing leaves that were only a year or two old doing this, then I would start to worry. But if it's just the oldest leaves, that would be my first thought, would be just natural leaf shed. If another thing could be just some kind of stress that's causing it to lose the leaves a little earlier than normal. But this at first blush doesn't look like an infectious disease to me. And the fact that your fungicides aren't helping could be another indication. The fact that it's happening in the cool weather, at the same season every year and then looking good, are other indications. A little bit concerning maybe that it's happening in the summer now, but I would just monitor the situation and make sure that it's not advancing to higher things. Maybe take a soil test, make sure you've got your nutrients optimized. and that it gets water if we have another drought. So yeah, that's about all I have on that one.
Okay, thanks, Mike. All right, next one.
So here we have another similar situation, this time on a conifer. It's one of the low growing junipers. I'm terrible at identifying those. I can recognize shore juniper and that's about it. But so one of the low growing junipers here, the needles are dying out lower down, just the most recent growth looking healthy. So there's definitely a problem going on here. I would not call this normal. But I would think that if it were an actual, let's say a root rot, like a Phytophthora root rot or a nosum root rot, something like that, you would see more branches, some branches down there that would be completely dead and not the new growth looking at least okay. So here I would suspect some kind of an abiotic issue, but I don't know which one in particular. I don't think it's any kind of a needle blight, anything you can spray for. The junipers really don't get those. Well, let's see, sometimes, now that I think about it, eastern red cedar can get Passiflora needle blight, but I'm not off the top of my head remembering that on some of these other, let's say Chinese junipers, that kind of thing. So a sample would help, but my gut here is that this is some kind of an abiotic problem, possibly a soil issue going on. All right, that was yours.
Okay, this is one of mine. So this is from Teresa Surratt in Pitt County. It says insect ID. This critter was on Rudbeckia in my garden. It was just sitting on the leaf, not eating anything. It was such a vivid blue that it really stood out. My searches say leaf-footed bug. I only got the one picture and did not see it again. Okay, well, you are correct. This is a leaf-footed bug. This is in fact the nymph of one of the larger leaf-footed bugs in the genus Acanthocephala. They are very pretty, and luckily they're really not a major pest, especially this genus. And I'll show you here. And also I should mention, even though I'm showing my photos, it's not to comment on other people's photos. It's just to show different views and different aspects of these critters. But you can see they have these beautiful iridescent abdomen in the nymphs, and they have the leafy legs a little bit, but the adults are going to look very different. So this is a leaf-footed bug, Acanthocephala terminalis. Terminalis is named that because the tip of the antennae is orange, compared to the rest of the body being a brownish gray, brownish black. And these are very large bugs, well over an inch long. You know, when they're flying, they buzz around really loudly. They almost sound like a wasp, but they are harmless to humans. They are also very rarely, I've never heard of them being a pest of plants. I think they sip sap from random plants out in the environment, but typically I think they're feeding on kind of hardwoods and things like, or woody plants out there. I don't really know much, and not a lot is known about what they feed on specifically, but they're not known to be a plant pest. So this is just an incidental thing. And so you can just enjoy these really beautiful nymphs. And the adults are harmless. They're fun to show kids because they're big and kind of slow, and they won't bite or harm anything. So that is a leaf-footed bug. So you were correct. Now there are other species of leaf-footed bugs out there. Some are a little bit more pestiferous than others, but these larger ones in the genus Acanthocephala are not something to be worried about.
So you may have noticed a trend here where Matt is more often able to give a definitive answer on these photographs than I am. It's a little bit tricky with diseases, but we'll do our best. There are some where I'll be able to give a little bit sharper answers, I hope, or at least get things narrowed down to one or two, or in this case anyway, give a tip as to what you might do next, because I don't have a definite answer on this, just a suspect. So let's set it up here. Annette Geeson, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, and apologies to anyone whose name I mispronounce. Tomato, plant with possible disease problems. Plants of many varieties died in the garden over the whole summer. A few pepper plants died also. Listening to your June lecture indicated probable verticillium wilt, but you indicated that was rare. Yes. So if you are not in the mountains, don't worry about verticillium wilt on your tomatoes. Even then, it's rare. Photos were taken from end of June to end of July. Excuse me, but other plants died earlier in June. Multiple varieties of tomatoes, cherry and larger. Wilting not helped by water eventually encompassed the whole plant and the plants died, produced very few tomatoes. So Matt, if you could go to the next slide here. I know this is unreadable on your screen, but there is in the North Carolina Extension Gardener Handbook, in the disease chapter, chapter 5, there's a sidebar there, or a center bar, I guess, on the screen, called When Plants Are Wilted, that will take you through a diagnostic key of different possibilities for things in the vegetable garden or in the flower bed that are wilting. It won't always get you to an exact answer, but it kind of helps narrow things down. So I just want to kind of make a note of that resource that you have available to you in the handbook. There are, in this case, many possibilities. The top one on my list would be bacterial wilt, because we do see so much of that, and it would be typical of your solanaceous plants like the tomato and the pepper that are affected here. Unfortunately, well, two things unfortunate. One is that that's a disease that persists in the soil. The pathogen does, if that's what it is. The other unfortunate thing is that it's not diagnosable from images only. The only thing really, there are two probably on this list of when plants wilt that you could diagnose from photos. One would be southern stem blight. And we didn't get any photographs either here or in any of the other submissions of the bases of stems. So those are always helpful. If it's at the right stage, well, if with southern stem blight, you can see the decay there. And if it's at the right stage, you can see the fungal growth itself, either the mycelium or the sclerotia that are developing. So that would be a case that could be diagnosed from photographs. Also, if you have root knot nematodes, you dig up the plant and you could see the galling. Not all host plants will have large galls. That'll vary, but on something like a tomato, you would have definitely visible galls there. So that could be diagnosable from a photograph as well. Some of these other things, though, would really require a physical sample or some other workup. But I would refer, again, people to that when plants are wilted decision key in the Master Gardener, in the Extension Gardener Handbook. All right, that back to you, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I do want to go back and just mention when these photos came in, this is how big they were. So I will say they're clear at this resolution, but if we want to see anything up close, when they're expanded, they get very blurry. So do note that you know, if you can send the largest files possible, we do get these submitted into our system every once in a while at this size, and it just makes things very difficult for us to see details in closer ups. And so you know, it's going to delay the process, and we may not be able to tell what's going on there. So just make sure that you're using the best settings on your camera or your phone, and sharing the best resolution images. If you aren't able to upload them in some way, you can always email them to us, and we will put them in there. But you know, the point of providing the photos is that they're clear, they're large enough for us to see them, and they provide a variety of different views. So.
And that is a mystery sometimes why that happens. I don't know if it's the.
I would definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would definitely, you know, test them out or send them to somebody or see, because you know they may look great on your phone, but when you send them, they end up being small or something like that. I'm not sure if they're compressed or whatever. And you may not know when you've sent it. You think it's this large photo, and then when we get it, it's very small. We'll definitely, you know, if we can't tell from the photos, and to maybe provide some more. But yeah, I would definitely use the best settings you can to get the most detail and the largest images.
And Gina's commenting here that the client send them to us that way. So yes, we feel your pain. And I see too that that those tomatoes and peppers didn't see root knot nematode or mycelia. I'm looking in the chat here. So yeah, that's even more suspicious than for bacterial wilt, southern bacterial wilt. Continuing on with the vegetable garden here. In the immortal words of Dr. Leonard McCoy, he's dead, Jim. This tomato looks like the picture was taken at the beginning of July, so a month and a half ago now, and the plants were already dead. And this is a similar case. I suspect it wilted first and then collapsed completely. Whereas now, if I think I have a second slide on this problem, Matt, if you could advance it one, yes. So there are many possibilities here with bacterial wilt, again, at the top of the list, just because we see it so often. And fusarium wilt is a possibility here too. And I saw the tag on there. It says here Cherokee, but the tag, it was half covered up, but it looks like it's Cherokee carbon, which is actually not a true heirloom, which I didn't realize until I did a little work today. The definition of an heirloom has to include, not only has it been around for a long time, 50 years, but it's got to be open pollinated. And Cherokee carbon is a hybrid between, I think, Cherokee purple and one called carbon. So likely it doesn't have resistance to, in fact, yes, I looked it up. It all says it has resistance to disorders, but I don't think any disease resistance, no disease resistance, excuse me, was listed. And so fusarium wilt is another possibility here. I'm less inclined to think southern stem blight. Again, we don't have the base of the stems here, or root knot nematodes, because of the simple fact that these beans, or first I thought maybe they were black-eyed peas, but those plants look good, whereas I would expect those to be affected too. It could be that they're just got lucky, but that's why I would put still at the top of the list, and because of its popularity, bacterial wilt, possibly fusarium wilt, possibly some of those others.
One of the questions we have is, how do you get rid of bacterial wilts?
Unfortunately, you do not. And there's no resistant cultivar hybrid that you can plant. About the only thing you can do is not grow tomatoes in that area, or use grafted plants. Those have been very successful for managing in tomatoes, managing southern bacterial wilt. And we've talked about those on previous programs, but yeah, there are some rootstocks that will do okay, and you can graft or buy grafted seedlings to use in those kind of situations. Thanks, Regina.
Right,
yeah, I'm not good at keeping up with the chat.
Thanks,
That's
Mike.
okay, I'll get you.
Great, thank you. All right, I guess we'll move to the
Yes.
next one. All right. Insect ID. Well, not an insect, but that's all right. That's part of the header. This spider, which I believe is a fishing spider of some kind, is the biggest spider I've ever seen. It was on the back screened in porch above the door to the house. It sat there the whole day, barely moving. The next day it was gone. I watched it on and off during the day. It didn't try to catch anything or move. I have a pond about 30 feet away, but I've never seen it there. I'm sending a second photo with a measuring tape to show the size of the brick, taken well after the spider was gone, as it's not going to try and measure it directly. That's a shame. No, I understand. It's these are very large spiders, and you are correct. This is a type of fishing spider. I'll show you another photo in the next page. They are one of the largest spiders we have, especially non-web building spiders. The black and yellow garden spiders are fairly large too. And you can see with the leg span that, it's basically, 4 to 5 inches in leg span, which is fairly massive. And they're called fishing spiders, also called raft spiders, because they do often live near water. I'll go to the next slide to show one of my photos of one. And it is the species Dolomedes tenebrosus, which is one of the most common species. They look somewhat like wolf spiders, but they have smaller front eyes. They're also often kind of rest in this X type shape and rest on surfaces. Now, they can bite, of course, if you were to grab one or something like that, but they are not aggressive. They're going to leave you alone. They're gonna do their thing, and they're not always found near water. They're often found in forested areas or natural areas that is close to water, but they're not always exactly found in water, and they're not always fishing for things. Although they are known to eat fish, catch fish in water, and feed on small vertebrates too, like lizards and frogs and things like that. They are fairly powerful spiders. And have venom, but the venom is not dangerous either. So I've never heard of anybody getting bitten by, oh no, I think we had one where one was in somebody's shoe in a situation many years ago where somebody put their foot in the shoe, and obviously the spider was not happy with that and bit the person. But I would definitely suggest always knocking out shoes that are left outside anyway, because anything could be in there. But these spiders, though large and menacing, are not aggressive, are not dangerous, and will gladly run away. And if left alone, they'll just do their thing. So thank you for the interesting spider. They are very large and impressive, and I always enjoy seeing them. So don't be too scared, though. They look way scarier than they really are.
All right. Barul sent this set of photos of cucumbers, Mecklenburg County, plant with a disease problem. The older leaves of my healthy cucumber plant have chlorosis. The plant otherwise is healthy and productive. So you do have some chlorosis there around the margins of these actual, I would say, necrotic leaf spots where the tissue is dead. And in this case, I think we've got a better chance of identifying what the problem is. So more concentrated on the lower leaves. So it is probably an actual infection, a bacterial or fungal infection. The spots look a little too round and not angular enough to be downy mildew, which also would be more uniform in color for starting out yellow and then turning necrotic, versus having a necrotic center and a yellow border. Doesn't look water soaked and angular like you would have with the bacterial leaf spot. So I'm going to say this is one of two. Matt, if you could advance the slide. Well, I also grab a link to put in the chat. So I'm going to say this is most likely anthracnose caused by the fungus Calotropicum orbiculare. And the other possibility is alternaria leaf spot, but that's not as common in our clinic records. And it also, in this case, you kind of sort of see that the spots are starting on veins, which is supposed to be a characteristic of Calotropicum, of the anthracnose. But anyway, I dropped a link there to a Rutgers publication that compares those two diseases. Supposing that it is anthracnose, here are some things that you would want to do. Crop rotation, of course, making sure you get the old debris cleaned up. Resistant cultivars, if you can find them. Clean seed and transplants, because this disease can be, or the pathogen can be, seed-borne. Keeping leaf wetness to a minimum, so avoiding the sprinkler hitting the foliage. If you have to water overhead, doing it at a time when you're not extending the overnight natural leaf wetness period. And possibly later in the season, you might, some fungicide applications might be justified. Those, if you look at, and I'll toss in another link to the NC State publication about cucurbit anthracnose, where it talks about fungicides being needed for the situation where a commercial grower is planting a second cucumber crop in the summer after harvesting the first. But I put a question mark there since it may not be necessary. And in fact, says right here, the plant is otherwise healthy and productive. So that's a good sign there. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, next one is an interesting one. This is from Beverly Hicks in Guilford County, dwarf euonymus. Plant with disease problem, looks like scales on the leaves, also distorted growth. Symptoms appeared 1 to 2 years ago. The close-up photo was taken April of 2021. The other photo is taken today. I'm assuming this is the close-up photo then. So this is interesting. This is actually two things going on here. Mike, you want to talk about the major thing?
Which
Or,
one is the
well,
major one?
Well, that's true. Yeah. The
The
most
fact
obvious-
that it's a euonymus, okay, that's
Yeah.
kind of major.
Yeah.
I said I would refrain from my personal
Yeah.
feelings about that plant, but I assume you wanted me to comment about the fasciation.
Yes.
So yes, the flattened stem there, and you may see this on sweet potato. I've seen it on squash at home. It's actually considered a desirable trait on certain celosia, the coxcomb type celosias, but that is, I guess the origins of it are a little bit mysterious. There's certainly a genetic component, but there may be some kind of environmental trigger as well that causes the plants to produce these multiple or flattened fused stems, and that's called fasciation.
So yeah,
But-
so okay, go ahead.
But no, I was gonna say, introduce you by saying, but
Of course, normally in fasciation, you'd have kind of just the typical tissue there, but this one's got these rough brown bumps all over it, which, as noted, looks like scales on the leaves. There are some on the leaves, and I'm actually kind of surprised by this. It's a very strange distribution. It does look like euonymus scale on this fasciated tissue or this branch, but I'm really surprised at how the leaves are fairly clear of them. There are a few here. You can see these are probably males here, these white ones, but the brown oyster shell ones on euonymus are typically going to be euonymus scale. Can be a common pest, especially of these evergreen ones, and they can actually kill the plant. But I would say in this case, the leaves in these pictures look fairly clean. So I'm not sure what the fate of this was earlier this year, but pruning out this large section will reduce that population greatly because they mostly congregate on here. We also don't know exactly why they would be congregating here, other than a couple things like maybe the plant, sometimes with strange plant growths like galls and things like that, there's more nutrients sequestered in those tissues. But also, Mike and I were talking, it could be that fasciated tissue produces fewer toxins that might help quell and keep back these scales. But I would say if you could prune out those really heavily infested branches, keep an eye on the population. There are some treatments for euonymus scale online, but otherwise the plants look fairly healthy. Otherwise, the leaves look green. They don't look very infested. It just seems that this branch was very strange. And thank you for sharing. It's a really interesting looking sample.
We have a couple, not questions, but just a couple comments. Julie Flower says she just saw fasciation on Rudbeckia last week. And another comment is saw flat stems on my white cucumber plants.
Yep, it can happen to a lot of plants. I do often see it in asters too, with the stems being really wide, and then even with the flower stems, they'll have the flower will be flattened then. So I feel like I notice it on asters a lot more than some other plants. But Mike, do you know if there's a kind of distribution of this type of disorder, this thing among plants?
No, I don't. I just, the examples that I cited were the ones that I was familiar with, but I don't have any real great handle on that.
Yeah, and this is a woody plant, which is interesting. So it's not just herbaceous or woody. It's really interesting, I think, when you see it. But it could just be pruned out, and it's not transmissible or anything, right? So it probably wouldn't be unless there was some kind of organism that caused the distorted growth. But in this case, it seems to be a growth issue, not anything that can transfer to different plants. Okay. All right.
So
Yes.
just a comment that we are at the halfway point of the program now, and I don't know, how are we doing as far as the slide set?
I'm not sure. So let's just keep going.
So Gina got this, Gina Myers from Wake County, got this through the Ask Extension website. I don't know, Gina, if you know for sure that it was Wake County or that you get referred things from elsewhere. Again, a consideration here is this is Distillium. It's a fairly recent addition to our palette of landscape plants, Hamamelidaceae, if I'm not mistaken. And this is supposed to be, I looked this up, hardy to only 6B, so it should be okay in Wake County. The yellow leaves of this, I do think there's some kind of a problem here. So you want to, even though, yeah, you might want to check to see if there's any evidence of cold injury, bark splitting or things like that on the stems, any injury to the stems. We have seen Phytophthora root rot on this plant, so that's not out of the question. But really, and this is a case where you need to see the roots to know what's going on. And with the extension, submission, that's not possible. So that's all I got on that one.
Okay, this next one I can introduce, although both Mike and I think we'll probably talk about this. So it's from Chris Grady in Lincoln County. Zucchini leaf plant, leaf with stalk. Leaf was wilted and removed from the plant for examination. It has been growing for 3 weeks. There are several large leaves that started wilting over the past 2 days. I removed the sample leaf and opened the stalk to reveal what you see in the photo. There's evidence of squash beetles and squash bugs. So squash beetles and squash bugs both being foliar pests. So they're going to be on the leaf surfaces, feeding, either chewing in the squash beetle case or sucking juices in the squash bug case. And the squash bugs may produce necrotic, necrosis in the leaves, where squash beetles typically just produce a lot of raggedness and kind of chewed damage. But we have in the stem, there's this kind of moist, granular green stuff. I don't really know a specific name to call it, but this is possibly fecal matter from squash vine borers. But oftentimes when I see it, it's usually more near the base and is often more kind of like wet sawdust, more brown and everything. So it's really kind of tough to see, to tell from this whether this is also some kind of swollen tissue inside the stem, cells of the plant that are swollen. It's hard to tell whether this is superficial or whether this is actually part of the tissue. So that's where photos are a little bit limited. But Mike, do you have I think you have some questions and comments too.
Yes, and I'm just, since you mentioned the squash beetles there, they do, or at least there's one or more species that transmit bacterial wilt unrelated to the one that gets on the solanaceous plants, but I'm not sure if that gets on squash. I know it gets on cucumber. I, though, wanted to ask the question, since this was from a few weeks ago now, what does this plant look like now? So Chris, if you're on the meeting, could you chat to us or unmute, and if that's possible, and let us know how, not only that zucchini in the back, but it looks like maybe some yellow squash toward the front there, how those are doing today. All right. Apparently Chris is not on. So I was more inclined to think this with the squash vine borer hypothesis, but you would have to dig down and see what the ground looks like. But I would suspect that plant is has completely wilted and probably died by now or will soon. But I guess we don't have that information to add.
Yes, and I would say if you see the wilting and follow it down to the base, the squash vine borers, it's going to be a white caterpillar inside the plant, and it'll make a mess of everything, especially near the base of the plant. You often see holes in the sides that have the sawdust, like the wet sawdust, like frass coming out. Okay, so Chris did answer. Plant continued to decline and was removed. Saw evidence of vine borers. Okay, so yeah, so basically, this may have been this may be from a young vine borer with a certain fecal matter that just got wet. but they do get quite large and they can completely bore into the bases of these plants and cause the wilting that's described. So you can, so you can perform surgery and save it. Sometimes if you catch the larva in there, you can slice open lengthwise the stem, kind of fold it open, remove the larva, and kind of tie it together with some thread or something like that. I've heard various success or not with that. So, be prepared for limited, for whether that'll work or not, unknown. So, but yeah, it could happen.
And I just checked our records here, and as far as that, the bacterial wilt of cucurbits, mostly we're seeing it, or we have seen it on cucumber, cantaloupe, melon. Very rarely you see 2 cases where we diagnosed it on pumpkin and 1 on yellow squash. So yeah, the hypothesis to beat there was the vine borer, and it sounds like that's what it was.
I guess we should probably speed up a little bit more, Mike. So, but yeah, here's the next one.
Very quickly then, hybrid tea rose, Mr. Lincoln, disease problem near complete defoliation early summer after beautiful plants in bloom in spring, now leafing out again, healthy growth. Have maintained water and spray schedule according to nursery advice, Witherspoon rose culture. So I was a little bit unsure on this one. The first things you suspect in a case like this would be either Cercospora leaf spot, and the fungus has changed names a couple of times now, but I'll still call it Cercospora for the moment, Cercospora leaf spot or black spot, which causes this, not only the spots, but also chlorosis, yellowing, and then defoliation. And the good news though, and the other possibility is that maybe just this extremely dry weather we had earlier was contributing to some stress there. But it looks like if it was one of those 2 diseases, that you've got it pretty well under control with your sprays, where they don't see evidence of black spot too much there. Don't know what's going on with those darkened veins, but the overall health of the plant looks good now. So you're doing the right thing. The one thing though, it does look, and I think I maybe mentioned this on the next slide, Matt, if you would advance it, that the legginess suggests that there's too much shade. So I don't know if there's some trees that are shading this bed. Looks like there's a building there. So that may be contributing to the kind of alleviated the legginess of the growth there. That's all I got.
Thanks, Mike. All right, next one. Do you want to handle this one?
There's not much I can say about this one either. The small proliferation of leaves there sort of suggests one possibility being herbicide injury, but we'd have to have a long conversation about that to try and excuse the pun, weed out the possibilities. So yeah, I'm going to call that one an unknown.
Yeah, when I looked at this, my first thought was some kind of herbicide or something because of all this adventitious growth on the trunk, on the stem, very central growth, and very strappy leaves and everything like that. I guess that was my thought, but of course, Mike is more of an expert than me, and we're also not complete experts on herbicides. So Dr. Joe Neal would probably be the one that would look at this and tell us whether he recognizes those symptoms from a specific chemical.
And also keep in mind that you can have herbicide injury in 2022 from an exposure that occurred in 2021. So the fact that it didn't leaf out or was late in leafing out, that doesn't mean it had to have been an exposure this year. Okay,
let's move on. All right, so Beverly Bell from Orange County, Viburnum, Shasta double file. 2022, majority of the leaves have dropped on the original plant. Green leaves seen in photos are relatively fine and thriving on a couple smaller suckers seen in front. Past years, typically for 20 to 30% leaves to drop on the end of the original plant's branches. Previously thought to be due to late summer unseen pest. Uncertain this year if massive leaf drop is due to drought, pests, heat, or end of cycle of mother plant or combo of issues. This viburnum is an understory plant in dry part shade, watered this year weekly, but did not slow leaf curling and dropping. Potential pest pick seen nearby. Okay, so I'll address the pest issues. I will say that defoliation, complete defoliation of viburnums is not common for insect pests. They may chew on the notches in them or little holes, but stripping the entire leaves off like that, there will be some remnants. And I will also note again, we got in fairly small images, so it's very tough to see the details. I will also say that this insect right here is a fish fly. They are not a plant pest. Their larvae develop in streams, and the adults come to lights, but neither the larvae are actually predators, and the adults are non-feeding. So this is just an incidental insect. It's one of those situations where knowing what the insect is can help you rule out that as a pest. But I would say that this is almost certainly not a pest issue, and I'll let Mike take over from here.
And I'm not going to be able to say anything definitive on this one either. It looks like that one is completely dead. It would be interesting to see if the cambium is dead. That's always a question when you see bare branches. Did they defoliate? Did the leaves just drop off? Or is it a true dieback where the cambium has died as well? So that would be good to check. My suspicion here is that it's actually a dieback that's going on, probably some kind of a root or crown or soil problem. But I mean, well, I wouldn't think soil itself because you see the adjacent plant good there. So you'd have to look for girdling roots for root rot. Yeah, more digging would be necessary here. All right, McDowell County, Cheryl writings. Tomato disease problem starts with older leaves developing spots, fruits appear okay, and then poof, spots on the fruit. Have alternated spraying with Serenade and Neem to try to control it. So this one, I don't want to be alarmist, but I wonder if this is late blight. Wish I had a tomato expert at hand here to ask, but the small spots don't look right for it, but some of those spots in the photo on the far right there, the larger grayish blotches, the fact that some of the leaves have blighted away completely. Yes, thank you for highlighting that. That is a little bit more worrisome. Now, this was from over a month ago, and it was only just, if you, oh, and the other thing, the fact that there are fruit symptoms. There aren't too many tomato foliar diseases that will also produce fruit symptoms. Late blight does. There's another Phytophthora that causes buckeye rot on the fruit, but since this is a container grown plant, you wouldn't think there'd be soil splashing up. So that particular one is less likely. So yes, and if you go to the next slide, Matt, thanks. There was a pest alert just last week about late blight on tomato being confirmed in a commercial tomato field in Haywood County, which is 2 counties over. Although of course the timing is much different. So this is a case where I would, if there's anything left there, I would encourage a submission to the clinic so that we can see what that is.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay.
Another tomato, much farther east. Oh no, not that much farther. Cleveland County, tomato Amelia VR hybrid VFFF, so it should be resistant to Fusarium races 1, 2, 3, to antiverticillium for the V, to nematodes, to, I think the T is tobacco mosaic, and the ST is Stemphylium leaf spot. So sounds like Roxanne felt that it was early blight, which is a possibility. Seeing it from mid-July until the present, which is good to know that. Picture from just earlier this month. If Matt, you go to the next slide really quickly. All that genetic resistance in the plant, this is most likely Septoria leaf spot or early blight as she suspected. I would probably be more inclined towards Septoria, but we'd almost have to have it in the clinic to see it. I don't think Septoria leaf spot forms the kind of concentric rings in the spots that you would see with early blight, but just because you don't have those, I wouldn't necessarily rule out early blight. I'd want to see the spores. Either way, what you want to do here is, of course, your crop rotation for early blight. There are some cultivars that are tolerant. They don't call them resistant, apparently, but tolerant of the disease. Making sure you have healthy transplants. That early blight can actually be on stems as well as leaves. So start out right. Then all the other good things like optimizing your water nutrition, trellising so you get good air movement and drying, mulching to reduce splash from the soil, avoiding excess leaf wetness. And you can remove the lower disease leaves on these. I wouldn't go more than a third of the plant, keeping, you know, at least 2/3 of the foliage there. So don't go crazy, but yeah, keeping those lower and heaviest disease leaves off is good. And in this case, yes, preventive fungicide applications. What's available to the homeowner would either be something containing chlorothalonil or something containing copper, which are both purely protectants, so that they will prevent infections, but they won't do anything if the infection has already started. And back to you.
Okay, from Barbara Smith in Craven County, insect to be identified. Found on my deck just once, not on a plant. Dog frequents this area, so wondering if it's harmful. So I'm excited to see this because this is a fairly rare insect as far as I'm concerned, and it is not harmful. This is a dung beetle, although this species is interesting. This is a Deltocylum gibbosum, which is one of our largest dung beetles and our largest roller. You can see these really curved, thin hind legs, which is indicative of the rolling dung beetles. But this is an interesting species because it's more actually necrophagous, which means they feed on dead things. So these will even roll up balls of dead meat and feathers and fur, and then their young will feed on that as well. So they do feed on dung, but they've also been known to feed on carrion or dead animals by making these balls to bury for their young. This one in the photo that you took, Barbara, is female. The males have these two humps here, and they're fairly impressive beetles. I really enjoy them, and it can completely harmless. They may be a little stinky because they feed in kind of rotting stuff and dung, but otherwise they are not harmful to anyone.
All right, as we say, I grew up oofta on this one. Carolyn Peterson, Johnson County, Loropetalum chinense disease problems. The system started in July. We have 2 Loropetalum shrubs side by side, and one is healthy. The other looks dry and has brown and red spots on the leaves. So this one is a bit of a tough one. We don't know if the 2 are the same cultivar. I would probably guess that, but it would be interesting to know that. Let me, Matt, if you could advance to slide 1. So this is one of the other photographs that you submitted, and it shows this kind of dwarfing of the young leaves. And we've seen that even on campus here, if I remember, and we've seen it on at least one sample that came in, but never been able to figure it out. Matt found a few mites there, but there's not enough to really explain it. And even when they used miticides in Florida, that didn't do it. There's been, I think, some idea that it was copper deficiency, and the sample that we got in a while back, they hammered it with copper sprays, and until they got, it was actually excess was detected when it was submitted to NCDA. So we don't know what that little leaf type symptom is. I will say, if you go to the next slide, there are there's another possibility for those leaf spots. Very common to find on Loropetalum, this leaf spot caused by the fungus Pseudocercospora liquidambaricola. So it also gets on sweet gum, as the name suggests. Kind of diffuse-ish borders there. Again, pretty common. And then the other thing you always want to look at, and I didn't see any in the photos, but it's hard to see because the stems weren't shown. And if you go to the next slide, Matt, the Loropetalum gall, it may be really large and obvious galls like this, and maybe more subtle sort of cracking in the bark, but you want to check for that as well. And while we I guess I wanted to make this point earlier with the tomato that I was concerned about late blight. I'll put it that way. Nobody, at least for the disease photos, nobody submitted any pictures of the undersides of the leaf. So keep in mind that when you do have a suspicion of a disease that you want diagnosed, it helps to have both the front and back of the leaf. And I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, so now we have Christine Stecker from Alamance, insect on crepe myrtle. Plant not blooming, sooty mold, about 1 millimeter insects infesting in and flying about crepe myrtle. So this is a fairly straightforward one. Crepe myrtles really don't get many insect pests, direct pests. This is the major one. The other one is the crepe myrtle bark scale, which is around in North Carolina, but is kind of patchy right now. It hasn't kind of completely taken over the state, but this one is everywhere. This is the crepe myrtle aphid with a very long name, Saracalus kahawaluokalani. So yeah, that's a difficult one to say. I'm not going to say it again, but it's fairly distinct. Really, the only major aphid on crepe myrtle, does produce a lot of honeydew, which can contribute to sooty mold. There are some fact sheets on this crepe myrtle aphid online, and we'll talk about control, but typical aphid control will work on these plants. And you can see they're very distinct. And again, the host is really the biggest identifier in that there are really no other aphids that would feed on crepe myrtle like this. Okay.
So back to tomatoes, and I also was catching on the chat there. Just wanted to make a quick comment that, yes, thank you, Charlotte, for pointing that out. We don't really see late blight as a problem on tomato in our state, except in the mountains, whereas most of our, some of those other problems you could find anywhere, like the Septoria, I suspect would be anywhere in the state. Now you can have late blight on potatoes elsewhere in the state, but for some reason the tomatoes just seems to be kind of a late summer coming in on the tomatoes in that area. So again, Roxanne with the tomato, and in this case, yes, the leaf curl due to heat in July, that is what we call physiological leaf roll. I don't really have a great explanation for that, but usually associated with the high temperatures that we have. So not anything to really be concerned about if you're just seeing it on the lower leaves like that.
Okay. Next one. You want me to read it, Mike? I can read it.
That's okay. That's okay. I was trying to look at the chat as well here. Ilex opacus, or native American holly. Not sure what's causing browning fruit clusters, browning leaves, branch dieback, leaf rot. Symptoms started last fall and become more intense this summer. I don't know what this would be either. Of course, it does drop its leaves normally at a certain time of year, but it would be, usually it's in kind of late spring, early summer that this would just do its natural shedding of its oldest leaves. So that doesn't seem right. And the fruit wouldn't turn brown. Yeah, this one is unknown. Monitor that and get back to us if it continues to go downhill.
Okay, so from Louise Romanov from Wake County, Aesculus sylvatica. So insect damage, no critter in sight within the last 2 weeks, zigzag feeding on upper leaf surface. So this is an interesting one. It is not actually.
This is very cool.
Yeah, this is not an insect. And in fact, it's kind of doing a little service to the plant because it's really just scraping superficially of what Mike mentioned was likely powdery mildew on this plant. And so this is often what happens on algae covered surfaces too, where you'll find mollusks. So this is the very characteristic feeding of slugs and snails. Now, slugs and snails feed differently than insects do. They are, of course, mollusks, gastropods. But instead of sucking or chewing with biting mouth parts or anything like that, they have a structure which is basically a kind of a tongue that's covered with little spines or teeth called a radulum. radula is the name, the plural. And basically what they do is they kind of push out that tongue and then scrape up the surface. So what you're seeing here is the superficial scraping of that mildew being fed on by by slugs or snails. You will often also see this pattern on inanimate objects or just artificial objects where algae has built up. That's a favorite food of slugs and snails, and you'll see these trails of where you can see actually where the individual teeth on the tongue, that radula, are located. And so they do these very specific scraping. So very interesting one.
Ciananthus americanus, Wake County, Stephanie Avett. Disease problem. I noticed a small portion of dead leaves a month or so ago. I cut that portion off and disposed of it. Now I've noticed half the bush is dead. Emoticon of a frowning sad face from the 10th of August. So again, this would be a case where you would want to, it sounds like you've tried pruning it out, which if it were just a localized canker should have worked if you got far enough. If you can trace it down the dead branch and find a transition zone to healthy tissue, then go ahead and try that again. Either way, go a couple inches into healthy tissue, but it's possible that you've got and I can kind of see there's something in the pith going on in the far left photograph there. May or may not actually be significant. I'd worry in this case too about something down in the roots, but without a physical sample in this case, I couldn't say too much more. But that looks like it's dead all the way to the ground, best I can tell from the photo. Hard to say.
All right, next one, Amy for Cumberland County, Baptisia australis, possible stink bug eggs and instars with possible webworm and webbing, larvae chewing leaves and leaves dying, Baptisia plant. Caterpillar has been on Baptisia for several weeks with webbing and chewing at the tips of the plant, chewing, causing leaves to turn black and die. Just noticed egg clusters of small black bugs on one of the leaves. So these are two unrelated pests, obviously, but both in the same plant. These are baby stink bugs, most specifically baby brown marmorated stink bugs, which will lay their eggs on all different plants and surfaces. But this is a much more specific pest to Baptisia. It is a non-native, and I'll show you pictures in a second. This is the Genista broom caterpillar. This is very diagnostic. There's no other caterpillar on Baptisia that will look like this. They do often cause a lot of webbing and foliar defoliation of Baptisia. And so it's one of the most common pests on these plants. And just to give you an idea, this is what a brown marmorated stink bug is going to look like when it grows up. And this is what the moth of that caterpillar looks like, almost like a fighter jet, I think. But it's a non-native pest that is very common on this plant. I would say, if you have this plant, you're going to probably expect to have it. So be on the lookout for the little caterpillars and use appropriate treatments. You can even just hand pick off and destroy the webs and hand pick off the larvae and destroy them if you find them.
So those hairs don't sting?
Not as far as I know. They're just kind of a regular CD of a typical caterpillar. And I will say, just to link that, the Caroline Ingram from Gaston County also submitted some hatchling stink bugs, and these are also brown marmorated stink bugs. They have this little kind of black triangle butterfly on the eggs, and typically look like this. The ones in the previous this photo, these are actually probably the second instars, so they start looking a little bit more like the adults, and of course the adults have these striped antennae. So I'm going to keep moving. I'll look from the chat.
And yeah, we are getting close to time here. Very quickly, the dwarf Colorado spruce. I'm not familiar with the dwarf forms of this. I would suspect that in Chatham as well as here in Wake, the blue spruces are going to struggle just because of the heat. It doesn't look like a needle cast disease since it's happening branch by branch and not needle by needle. So there may be some kind of a canker going on there. If pruning doesn't take care of this and pampering, then I would chalk it up to the stress of living in the heat. I see you put Osmocote, so that's time release as long as you a few teaspoons or tablespoons. Yeah, you should be fine there. I don't think you overdid anything, but yeah, hopefully that works out. Yeah, again, you see how it's happening really branch by branch and not like a needle cast would.
Okay, here is a tomato from Carol Bowman. Don't know which county. It says plant disease. Disease began very early in this season. I will say that I'm talking because this does not look like a disease to me, and to Mike as well. This looks like a few different insect issues. So the first thing to notice is there's this white stippling and little black specks everywhere, but also some superficial kind of larger black fecal, frass and some chewing here. So even though the pests aren't present here, I have a few suspects. I will say also that just like with other pest issues, if you don't see the pest, I would definitely scout at night and scout at different times of day. Also, if you see fecal pellets, you want to look up because they drop. They are susceptible to gravity as well. And so I would look up in the leaves in the more of the canopy for things falling down. But the things I suspect here are the little white spots and some of these dark fecal specks that are flat, maybe from garden flea hoppers, which are very common feeding on lots of garden vegetables. And I suspect some of this chewing damage is either from beetles, but also oftentimes in tomato, you see armyworms and other caterpillars that when they're young, they leave small fecal pellets called frass. And again, these could be feeding up above this leaf and dropping on there. So just search really well around there. These won't kill the plants, but they make them look unthrifty and can kind of stress them out a little bit.
This one is an interesting case here. So Moore County from Joe Pyeweed, excuse me, which I'm not sure if I've given up on trying to keep up on the correct scientific name of it. The interesting comment though here, every plant grown in this area dies with a year, so disease problem. Not sure which cultivar. Plants start off fine, then about 3 months die completely. They receive regular irrigation, soil is sandy. I've tried multiple types of plants and they all die. Soil test does not show any deficiencies. So my suspicion is that it's not a disease because, well, two things. One, is happening so quickly. There are not many that will kill a plant in 3 months. The other is that, or kill every plant. No, that's the other problem, is that with a great variety of plants affected, about the only one that would work that fast and hit that many plants would be the southern stem blight. So you want to check the base of the main stems here for any of that, any decay or evidence of fungal mycelium or sclerotia. Barring that, I would scour the possibilities of something wrong actually with the site. Sounds like the soil was already tested, no deficiencies, but it might be good to send it under the form AD2, I think it is, as a problem or a diagnostic soil test to the NCDA. Yeah, this is a tough one. This one a little bit easier. Hydrangea says disease problem began early July. I don't know about the dead stems. That looks more like old cold injury, but the spots on the leaves, which are better seen in the next slide here, the photograph up close of quite a large number of leaf spots, and even closer up in the next photograph. So when you see this, basically think one of two things. And I've got a picture of my own on the next slide comparing them. Very common late season on big leaf hydrangea, Cercospora leaf spot, which tends to be smaller and have white centers. Coronespora leaf spot, a little bit larger and browner. So my guess is that was Coronespora leaf spot, both fungal. And the other thing, you can get large leaf blotches, excuse me, but look a little different with just the wilting spots in the heat of the summer. But in this case, I think it's probably the Coronespora. And Acalacanthus, this one is also a difficult one here, though it was interesting some of the information that the shrub, I've had the shrub for 5 years. For the first 3, I had no problems. But then it mentions that last year and this year stated to have some kind of fungus problem. I'm not sure that it is. It doesn't look at least like a fungal foliar infection. The key though seems to be that it was moved. So it was moved from one home to another. So it may have to do with the site there at the new place. Full sun, from what I looked up, shouldn't be a problem for this host. Maybe Caroline can correct me on that. But it does look like there's some kind of stress going on. So I would look toward a soil test here and monitor the situation. Yeah, I don't have a good answer on this one.
All right, now this one is from Sandy Harwood in Chatham County. This is standard camellia. Insects on 10-year-old camellia appears to be T-scale. Common on camellias. This camellia has had scale and still bloomed beautifully. Plant is 12 to 15 years old. Have applied horticultural oil sprayed with water, but so difficult to treat. The backside of the leaves. This year we noticed white webs. Maybe time to take some cuttings and dig it up. So I'm not sure I would go that drastic with it, but you can see a lot of the old growth has these patches, yellow patches on the top. I'm assuming this is the underside of that same leaf. At first it looked almost like the top side. It's kind of an optical illusion, but it basically, this is a very common pest, T-scale, you are correct. Coats the undersides of camellia leaves. We'll get on hollies too and a couple other hosts, but most often seen on camellia, thus the name T-scale. I would say, it all depends on the shape you're looking for. The older leaves tend to get a lot more because they build up populations there. Removing the older leaves and then treating, looking for the symptomatic leaves, removing them, that'll get rid of the source population, at least a good bit of them. And maybe applying some treatments may help. But you can see here on some of these, you can see the patches where they are. So you'll definitely want to pay attention to the leaves that have yellow on the top, because that is a direct sign of those insects infesting. But they are very common, and you can see the new growth is typically good looking on camellias. They tend to build up more populations in the older leaves that we see. So there's definitely some information out there, and I think Charlotte has put in something on T-scale in the chat.
Winding things up here, I believe this is the last one for me anyway. St. John's wort, Brunswick County. This is not rust. I'm not saying there's not rust on the plant, because it is, I've seen it pretty heavy in here on campus. That wouldn't cause, though, I don't think, all this dieback. Why it would be different from one year to the next. So yeah, here's another case where you want to look closely, see if there's a transition zone lower down, but I especially suspect some kind of a root or soil issue, unfortunately. And yeah, so picture is not going to be enough in this case.
I think we're seeing a trend here of, unfortunately, photos are not as helpful for diseases as they are for critters typically. But it still shouldn't. I wouldn't discourage anybody from taking the photos of these and submitting them with the samples, especially physical samples, because these can be quite helpful for us, even though they may not exactly tell us what disease is there.
Yeah, and thank you, Matt, for saying that, because it can be really helpful to see landscape elements, maybe a stump, maybe proximity to a downspout, that sort of thing that helps us complete the diagnosis. But it can even be helpful as a guide to sampling. So if we see, a series of photographs, we can say, oh, that particular photograph, that's the one you wanted to get a sample of, or this particular part. So yeah, photographs, even though they're not, a lot of times not definitive for disease diagnosis, they are all very helpful.
We have one question from Pat McFarland. How do you treat the fungal issues identified on hydrangeas? I have as well, the hydrangeas.
Right, that they are ubiquitous, especially the Cercospora leaf spot. So I I would, in most cases, just not really try anything. You could, there are some general home fungicides that can be used. Let me drop a quick thing in the chat here of different products that can be used by homeowners for plant disease control. But so yeah, some of those could be helpful, of course, avoiding the leaf wetness and keeping fallen dead leaves picked up. But it's not gonna, neither of those are going to kill the hydrangea plant. They'll just be a recurring late season disfigurement, put it that way.
So we are done with the slideshow. Thank you everyone again for submitting your photos. Sorry we didn't have definitive answers for everything, but unfortunately that's just the way it goes with some of these things. Charlotte, if you want, we can do our bolos, but people can hop off if they need to, and we can just do it for the recording if you'd like, or people can stay on for a few more minutes while we do some be on the lookouts. What do you think, Charlotte?
I think that's a good idea. So go ahead and do them. And if people need to leave, you can head
Sure.
out. We appreciate you being here, but we'll have it on
Yeah.
the recording.
Yeah. Okay. And feel welcome to stay. And otherwise, if you need to go, that's fine. These will be on the recording later on. Okay. So I will start off, I guess, Mike. I'll just bring
Please
these
do.
up. So I have arthropod bolos for September. So you may see some soldier beetles, these orange and black beetles out on plants and flowers, especially in the fall. You guys start to see a lot of them. And beginning in September, I will say you may, especially in a little bit later in the early fall, you're going to maybe start seeing the larvae crawling around on driveways and sidewalks. They're these velvety black larvae. Note that they are not pests; they are predators of other insects, and the adults are pollinators. So these are just kind of scary looking, but they're not harmful in any way. Next thing, peach tree borers. So late summer, early fall is the time that females start laying eggs. Peach tree borer females look like a kind of hunting wasp or a potter wasp. They've got this dark body, purplish black with this orange band. And this was actually ovipositing near a prunus that was in my yard many years ago. So they'll oviposit near the bases of trees. If you start to see a lot of activity near your prunus, with moths like this, that's a good sign that they're laying eggs nearby, and maybe one of the control tactics is to use chemicals on the bases of trees nearby and bushes nearby that can then come in contact with the larvae that hatch and then start to crawl and bore into the plants. So they don't actually lay their eggs on the plants necessarily, but usually nearby in the soil. You'll also start to see larger caterpillars, especially a lot of the armyworms in the genus Spodoptera. One to really be on the lookout for is the fall armyworm. We may see, it's hard to tell year to year when we start seeing grass damage, but late August, early September is when they're starting to come up here more abundantly. They don't survive winters here in North Carolina and come up from, say, places like Florida, but they can completely defoliate lawns. So if you start to see a creeping large patch of brown, and look for the larvae there. They may be little at the time, but you can do soap washes too. If you mix a bucket of soapy water and pour it into the ground, the soil near the front, you may get these larvae coming out of the grass. So these are all fairly large caterpillars feeding on different types of plants. This is also the time to remove bagworm bags. The bagworms have probably made it by now, so if you remove bags, especially without a pupil skin hanging out of it, where the male is from, you want to slice off that connection point and unwrap it, but this will get rid of a lot of the bagworms that would hatch next year. You also going to start to see a lot of large spiders. So we began some images of the large black and yellow garden spiders. You guys start to see a lot of these barn spiders and big orb weavers out. That's because many of these species have been growing the rest of the year and have been small and inconspicuous. But now that it's the late summer, early fall, that's when they get the biggest. They're going to be mating. They're going to be feeding on lots of big prey. But note that they're basically harmless and blind and make beautiful webs. So even though they're scary, they should be of no concern. Along those lines, the wheel bugs, the large assassin bugs, so with this big cog on the back, are going to become adults now, and so they're going to be more conspicuous. They are beneficial predators, although they feed on anything they can catch. And also just note that you don't really want to hold them because if they jab you, it's supposed to be extremely painful. So just keep an eye on them, but they aren't dangerous or aggressive, and they may be abundant. And of course, lots of the late summer, early fall flowering plants are going to be attracting a lot of insects, goldenrod especially, but lots of other flowers. You may see this is a blister beetle, but I've actually got a call about a lawn with a lot of these these blue-winged wasps, these scoliid wasps. They are flying around lawns right now, sometimes because they parasitize white grubs, and so they are beneficial. They don't sting. So if you see these flying around, it's good news that there's parasitoids there, but bad news is that you probably have a lot of white grubs in your lawn. So anyway, that's all I have for the arthropod bolos.
We have one quick question. Any comments as to why swallowtails seem to appear quite late this year?
So it's hard to say exactly what the timing is for insects year to year. It could be that there was a late start for a lot of the plants. That may, with the tomatoes and things like that this year, a lot of the dry weather early on, the plants might not have gotten started and thus don't have enough nutrition for the caterpillars, and then that just delays everything. This year was pretty, dry early on, so I think that affected a lot of things this year. But we're actually seeing a lot of abundance of a lot of different insects, I feel like, this year. Okay, Mike.
All right. Do I have, let's see, may have done this in the wrong order. So can everyone see the slide with the oak next to the coneflower? All right, my introduction to the bolo question here is, what do these two situations have in common? So we've got some oak leaves with the margins and tips drying out, and then we've got coneflower where the flower has turned green or developed green, and even some of the what should be flower structures look like little leaves there. So what do these two have in common? Anybody want to take a shot at that? All right, Charlotte says phytoplasma question mark. That is what I think is happening with the coneflower, yes, but the oak is going to be bacterial leaf scorch. So one thing they've got in common is these are two, now they haven't been tested, but based on the symptoms, it's pretty confident. These are two examples of bacterial diseases, but caused by rather unusual bacteria, and each in their own way. The Xylella fastidiosa on the oak and a Aster yellow's phytoplasma on the coneflower and the echinacea. The other thing they have in common is that those bacteria are vectored by insects. So we have leafhoppers, different kinds of leafhoppers, I believe Matt can correct me, in each case that are the vectors of the bacteria. So Matt's nodding his head. Nothing.
Yep. Leafhoppers in general. There's actually many species that will carry these. Some are more competent than others, but really we just kind of say leafhoppers in general for both those.
So very quickly then to our bolos, general bolos for September, just things that may be out and about, starting to see the mushroom-like things coming up. So some of these are, I guess you could call them both mushrooms, but I tend to prefer calling it a mushroom if it's a gilled mushroom. So you can kind of see the gills on this, probably a chlorophyllum there, the largest photograph. Are you seeing my cursor? I'm never sure where to put which screen to put it on. So you can kind of see the gills developing here. Bolates would be soft like mushrooms, but they would have pores on the underside instead of gills. We had a bunch of these pop up in the yard at our house yesterday or in the last couple of days. Also, we may be seeing some slime molds. We've got the moisture for it. Here's an interesting picture from August of 2 years ago that someone submitted on a garage door with the fruiting of a stemonitis slime mold. And the third thing, completely unrelated, but tropics have been quiet lately, but make sure you have your preparedness plans for tropical cyclones moving in and affecting our state. Turf grass I usually leave to the end because it's not my area of expertise, but I moved it up a little closer here because of the fairy ring point. So you may be seeing fairy rings either as the green rings, the dead rings, and they can also be arcs, or you can be seeing the mushrooms or puffballs developing in the rings themselves. Brown patch on your tall fescue or ryegrass, large patch on your warm season turfs, both of those caused by Rhizoctonias, gray leaf spot on fescue and St. Augustine's grass, and rusts on multiple turf species. Alternaria leaf spot and petal blight of zinnia is something that you may encounter, as well as, of course, powdery mildew on zinnia, which I've got pretty heavily. And this alternaria, though, one thing to keep in mind about it is it can be seed transmitted. Other bolos for September, powdery mildew on many different kinds of hosts, both woody and herbaceous, rusts on aster, ironweed, other weeds like the goldenrod that Matt mentioned. Secondary leaf spots coming as the leaves start to senesce, tubercular leaf spot on oak, for example. Many hosts you could be watching for Phytophthora root rot or Armillaria root rot or their consequences. And there's an asterisk. We've reached the season of asterisks for Armillaria because in September is the season when you may actually see the mushrooms. It's not always going to be there, but if they are, there'll be clusters of basically honey-colored mushrooms. And you can send us a photograph of those if you see them, if you're suspecting that's what's affecting your trees or shrubs. Bacterial leaf scorch on the red oak group, on sycamore and redbud. So we showed that at the beginning of the bolos here. Redbud less likely, but red oak, sycamores. Also on grapes, that's going to be a concern called Pierce's disease. Boxwood blight, start keeping an eye. That seems to have a little bit of a resurgence when I don't know if it's the cooler weather, the damper weather, what it is, it moves in. But I get the feeling we start to see a little bit more of it now going into the fall. Of course, fruit on the apple trees. You could have black rot, bitter rot, and the superficial, really cosmetic problems of sooty blotch and fly speck. Whereas the more serious would be the something like a bitter rot there. You see the large lesion on that. On tomato, septoria leaf spot, we've already talked about today. Gray leaf spot is another one. That's the photograph here. You can see late season on tomato leaves, and the fruit itself, you may see things such as growth cracks.
We have a question about mushrooms. What should we do about mushrooms? I have an increasing forest of them in my front yard.
Let me ask the question, what your concern is. Do you have children or pets that that might want to eat them, or what was the concern specifically about the mushrooms? Because in most cases, they're actually, very few actually cause harm to plants. Just wanted to know. Okay,
Just
yeah.
wanted to know.
Yeah, in most cases, they're actually beneficial. So they're mycorrhizal in association with roots of trees. Some of them would be saprophytes breaking down organic matter and so on. Some of them can become nuisances, not really mushrooms, I would call them, but some like the stinkhorns, for example. But there's really not anything you can do about them. If there is concern for pets or for children, just keep on top of removing them frequently or supervising so that they don't get ingested. But yeah, there's not really any kind of treatment that can be done to eliminate them. And in most cases, you really wouldn't want to. Can you test for Pierce's? Mart? Yes, you can test for Pierce's disease on bunch grape leaves. We test the petioles though, so make sure that when the leaves are, symptomatic leaves are taken, then you would want to include those petioles.
That was the next question. Thank you.
Great. Any effective treatment for nematodes? Not that would be available to the homeowner. There are, well, I take it back. I think there is a registered product that can be used in turf grass against some nematode species, but again, that's not my area. If turf grass is the issue, then you might want to check with Lee Butler. But for things like the tomato garden and so forth, there aren't any kind of chemical treatments that you could do. There is still the possibility of things like the mass plantings of marigolds to help reduce the population, rotation and so forth. I would, you might want to check out the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Nematode Assay Lab has some online fact sheets about nematodes in the home garden.
We have
Matt,
a
I think the next
question.
one's for you.
Asian needle ants, any treatment for it?
Not anything super effective or widespread. So they're going to be really common in yards all around, especially in kind of wooded areas. But even outside of wooded areas, there are some baits and some products out there that will maybe treat a colony or something like that. But honestly, they're just so abundant everywhere that they get recolonized, and it's basically impossible to rid them from an entire area, especially for any length of time. So it's one of those things where if they're in an area that you're not happy with them being in, you may be able to use some baits. I'd have to talk to our pest specialist for those, the recommendations for those. But unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to control them from an entire area.
One thing, if I can just add to the nematode comment, I wanted to check, I don't have it off the top of my head, the idea of grafting. We talked about that, and it's a good strategy with tomatoes against bacterial wilt. I'm not sure, but it'd be something worth looking into if any of the grafted tomatoes, for example, would be useful in a situation where you know you have nematode problems. And we know that there is some resistance. That's the N in the VFN code, but that's not 100% necessarily.
Well, thanks everyone for all the great questions and interest, and thanks for staying on longer than usual. Hopefully it was interesting and useful, and we will see you next month.
Yeah, this is Matt and I enjoy doing this. It can be a challenge, but we enjoy going through your photos and comments and trying to address them.
Yeah, we enjoy seeing what you are seeing. It's really fun to see that stuff.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I threw up the slide for next month, so that'll be September 27th. And that's when Rebecca Ward will be with us to talk about climate change mitigation for gardeners and homeowners. We'll see you all then.
Great. Thanks, Regina and Charlotte.
Yes, thank you, Matt and
Hey,
Mike.
thank you so much. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
What mine is I went to this is not about plants or the bugs. It's about the Master Gardener intranet. I went over there, I had registered and I thought it was going to be 10 to 11:30. And then I went there first and it said it was 11 to 12:30. So I didn't join until 11. Is there a way that y'all can change it so it won't be that way on the next time?
I will definitely check into that. Thanks for letting me know. But the whole thing is recorded, so at least you can.
Right, I know that.
Recorded.
I might not be the only person it happened to. And I had noticed it did that last month, but I had already, it was when I was going back to log the time, and it was like, oh, it says it was 11 to 12:30. It's like, but it didn't because I was there at that time. So I was just curious if y'all could change that. Thank you very much. It was wonderful what I got to see, and I'll go back and I'll see the rest of it later. I appreciate it.
Good. Sorry
All
about
right.
that. I will
Yeah.
mention that it is always 10 to 11:30, I think, right? Our Pest Pathogens webinar. Is that, you're talking about this webinar, I'm assuming?
Right, right.
Yep, it is. You can just keep it in your mind. It has been for years. I don't think we've changed the time starting time at least for 10 a.m. from 10 a.m. So just if there's any other times shown there, it's probably not going to be correct because I think